Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be covering game plans, win conditions, and just overall how to adapt within a game of League of Legends. Now, this is going to be quite a dense and complex video, so I strongly recommend that you either have a notepad next to you with pen and paper or just a Google Doc so you can alt-tab, take notes, and continue with the video. Now, when saying that, I do strongly recommend that you either watch the video 2 or 3 times over, or split up the viewing of this video across 2 or 3 differing sessions. So how exactly will this video work? So this video is going to tie together all of my previously mentioned mid fundamentals videos. If you haven't watched my videos on tempo, wave manipulation, roaming, jungle tracking, etc., then this won't make too much sense because this is just going to tie it all together real nicely with a little ribbon on top, alright? So by the end of this video, you'll have all the tools and the knowledge to improve your ability on creating a solid game plan, identifying the possible current win conditions, and being able to adapt throughout the entirety of a game. So keep in mind, guys, that because League of Legends is incredibly detailed and there's so many champions within a game, there is basically an infinite amount of win conditions that could potentially come about within a game. So all this video is going to do is actually identify the variables that you need to consider every single game, so you can actually use this video while reviewing to refine your ability on adapting and identifying a win condition within every single game. And note, guys, this took me years. Like, this skill that I developed, this literally took me years because I had to rack my brain and figure out what I was actually thinking about, what did I actually consider, when and why. So all this is going to do is actually just fast track this whole process for you and save you a bunch of time. So when it comes to win conditions and actually understanding how they work, I found this specific analogy that I'm about to share with you incredibly helpful when it comes to illustrating the mindset required to improve at this skill. So what I want you to do is just envision there's a person next to you who's just set up a blank canvas next to you, and they've got their little brush set, they've got their little palette there with all the different colors, and they just begin to draw a few lines. So as you watch this person, you're thinking to yourself, what are they painting? I have no idea. It could be anything. It could be a portrait. It could be of a certain piece of landscape. It could be of a house. You have no idea what they're painting. And it's the exact same when heading into a game of League of Legends. You have no idea what the win condition is. It could be bot lane. It could be mid lane, playing mid to top, diving top. Could be stacking dragons. Could be playing through your jungler. You have no idea. But as this person begins to add a little bit more detail, maybe a few more lines, a few more colors, you start to think to yourself, it's definitely not a portrait, or it's definitely not a landscape. It has to be either this or this. And you start to narrow down your choices. In League of Legends, as the game, gets a little bit more detailed, you see certain players getting kills, or this person's specifically behind, this person specifically ahead. You can start to get a better idea of what the possible win conditions are, and as certain things happen, you need to be ready to adapt. Now, this is where the analogy gets a little bit more crazy and maybe a little less realistic, but imagine a person comes along and just starts to watch, maybe they were watching this person paint, and then they start to grab one of the brushes and paint over their lines, or maybe erase some of their lines. And then you start to think to yourself, okay, it's definitely not this anymore, or it's definitely not that anymore. And you have to adapt your initial hypotheses or your initial guesses of what that painting could be. In League of Legends, because there is so much chaos and you can't reliably assume that they're going to play out their lane matchup perfectly, or they're going to be able to snowball that lead. You need to have this very open mindset and approach every game when it comes to identifying win conditions with this very on-the-fly level of assessment. And it will make more sense as we go into details, but I thought this analogy would shed a little bit of light about how I view win conditions within solo queue. So there's a few steps when it comes to creating a game plan. So step number 1, we got to create an initial game plan. Step number 2, we got to identify the initial win condition. And then step 3, we adapt. And then we adapt again, and then we adapt again, and then we adapt again. So we always adapt throughout the game. So it's important to note, guys, that when you create an initial game plan as a mid laner, it basically only comprises probably 5% of the things that you need to do to win the game. The other 95% actually involves identifying key variables and adaptation as the game actually plays out. So keep in mind that the initial game plan isn't overly important. This is actually just because of how chaotic solo queue is. We have no idea how the game will be won. We have no idea how the lanes will be played out. Even if on paper this is a counter matchup or a good matchup, we don't know. Execution of the matchup is a whole different ball game. And we have no idea what the jungle will do. Where are they going to path? Where are they going to gank? What objectives are they going to do? We have no idea. So it's important to keep this very open mindset and keep in mind that competitive is a whole different ball game, all right? So in competitive, especially at a very high level, when someone gets a counter pick, we can basically, with around 95 to 98% confidence, assume that the matchup will be played out appropriately. You know, the counter matchup will result in pressure, or it will result in a certain thing happening. But in solo queue, as we all know, things just don't go to plan, and even if they get counter pick, it's very rare that it goes, you know, how it would on paper. So that is something to keep in mind. So when heading into a game, guys, there are so many variables that actually run through my mind that help me determine my foundation or give me a solid direction heading into a game, that help me determine my specific game plan. So the first thing I like to think about is actually just the straight up 1v1 matchup. I start to think about trading patterns. What does a good trading pattern look like in this lane? What does a bad trade actually look like? And then I start to think about, how are the runes and summoner spell choices actually going to influence this lane? Do they have Ignite? Do they have Heal? Do they have TP? Have they gone for a lane rune, a scaling rune? Because this all really influences the early game plan. Next, I actually start to think about the jungler's identity on both teams. I start to think about, what does their pathing look like? What do their paths usually look like? And I start to think about, are they an early spiking jungler? Do they need like level 5 before they can do anything? I start to think about their early strength. Now, with this information, I think about, how exactly should I manipulate my wave to either complement the obvious strengths within this 2v2 or cover for key weaknesses? So let's talk about Zoe versus Kassadin, for example. What would you say the key strengths are of this 2v2? Maybe let's just take, for example, Zoe Jarvan versus like Kassadin Sejuani. Well, we know that Jarvan has a lot of kill threat on Kassadin, so I need to find a way to utilize that, because that's a key strength. And given that I have complete wave control over Kassadin, I can do that. So maybe a potential option would be to, you know, hard push the first 2 waves, bounce the wave off at level 3, and let Kassadin push out and create a really easy gank setup. Conversely, I might actually have a Kindred or a Graves on my team where I know we can't really set up a gank, so maybe it's actually best for me to isolate the 1v1, slow build a wave, poke them under tower, establish that river control, and just back up my jungler if something actually happens. So you can actually see how when creating a game plan, you can't just view it in terms of the isolated 1v1. You need to think about it in terms of 2v2, you need to take into account runes, summoners, and when you're heading into the loading screen, start to think about these things, start to get the creative juices flowing, and it all comes down to hypothesizing. You're not going to be right every single time, but as long as you have a hypothesis, you will be able to improve this process. Now, if the junglers are both farm oriented on the other hand, or I don't think that the matchup will be affected by junglers, then I can begin to think about things like this. What are my key item spikes? What are my key level spikes? What amount of gold is optimal for me to base on? Maybe I'm playing Twisted Fate and I know I can't really set up a gank, so maybe 1100 gold is a good amount. Or maybe I'm playing Orianna, I can't really punish this person in the early game. Do I want to base for early Darksteel Dorans? Do I want to stay in lane for 1100 gold for Sorks? Or do I want to actually pace out my lane and actually get to 1300 gold? These are all viable questions. Where does the wave feel nice for trades? Do I want to keep the wave on my side, their side, in the middle? And I start to think about, maybe I'm versing a champion like Xerath or Lux. They hate getting shoved in. So if I keep shoving them in, I know I will be safe in the lane. Is it going to be a scuttle fight? And can we even contest it? And what does my jungler need from me? If I know I have a Graves into a Zac jungle, I know that I should be looking to back him up, because he's going to be probably constantly invading. So as you can already see, this sort of thing when creating a game plan, this will improve over time as you increase your understanding on jungle tracking, jungle knowledge, wave manipulation, matchup knowledge, training fundamentals. This is why all the fundamentals come into play when when creating a game plan. And this is actually why I only recommend playing a few champions. Imagine creating a game plan when you barely have any champion mastery or don't really know the champion's identity. You're not going to know what sort of trades you want. You're not going to know if you win that 2v2. You're not going to know how to play out this specific matchup given they've taken this rune and this summoner spell choice. This is why I only recommend 3 or 4 champions. How are you meant to know this on 5 or 6 differing champions? It's even for me, it's incredibly hard. So thirdly, guys, this is where I begin to contemplate how I believe the side lanes will actually play out. And there's a bunch of variables I need to consider. And this is all what I consider within the loading screen. The first thing I like to think about is pace. So how heavy trading is the matchup? This will actually help me dictate which side I should be leaning to in the early game, because this is where action will most likely take place. So if I see in the loading screen Riven versus Darius, Riven has Ignite, Darius has Ghost. I know most likely that this will be a very heavy trading matchup. They're both melee, they both need to get close and trade blows with each other, and most likely they're going to play that lane quite fast. So if I'm playing something like Rumble mid, I'm thinking to myself, you know what, I could probably influence that lane early, and most likely if I lean to topside, I could maybe influence that 1v1 quite heavily. That's where the action is going to happen. And as we know, guys, junglers gravitate towards it's like one of those mosquito things, and then all the mosquitoes get attracted. It's the exact same thing. Like when top laners or bot laners are heavy trading, the junglers want to come and either help, get them a reset, get a kill, blow summoners. That's where action is going to take place. So when you're in loading screen, it's really good to think about how heavy trading do you think that matchup is going to be. Next, I think about pressure. Who exactly spikes earlier? Now, this can really help you with determining the likelihood of a scuttle contest on that side. So for example, if I'm in loading screen and I see that I have a Pantheon on my team versus a Kayle, then most likely if there's a split second decision that needs to be made, can we contest this scuttle or not? I'm already thinking, you know what, we probably should be able to do this because we have the Pantheon. Surely we can, right? If a fight breaks out, I would way rather a level 3 Pantheon than a level 3 Kayle. So what this can actually do is when you aren't sure whether the fight can be won or lost, it can kind of tick you over the edge and make it a lot easier to make that split second decision. Next, I like to think about gank setup and kill threat. So the reason this is important to think about is it helps me roughly decide whether that side is gankable or not. So this is, again, very useful if I'm playing any roam-centric champion. Maybe I'm playing something like Fizz, Kiana, Rumble, Talon, TF, any of these champions that really want to roam. If I know my laner has a lot of kill setup or kill threat, then it's going to make my life much easier. So I'm already starting to prime myself. Which side has a lot of kill threat? If I'm versing something like a set top with I have a Kayle top and they have a set, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be able to roam topside. So already I'm thinking in my mind, you know what, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be roaming top at all. So when deciding where to roam, I've already roughly thought about it. So I've primed myself to think, okay, most likely I'm going to be roaming bot side this game. Snowbally. So I really like to think about how snowbally a matchup is. In a matchup like Tryndamere versus Aurelia, for example, that's incredibly snowbally. Like if one of the sides gets a kills, then it can completely turn into a stomp. So this will help me decide what is and what isn't worth sacrificing in my lane for roams. So if the top matchup conversely is Ornn versus Maokai, it's probably not worth me sacrificing a wave or a lead in my lane to get that kill, because it's not like Ornn or Maokai is going to take over that game. It's not like that matchup's super snowbally. Like still, even if I get a kill for one of those people, it's not going to change the game. So the how snowbally a matchup is can really be an important concept to understand. And if I have a really snowbally matchup top, maybe it is worth sacrificing a wave or two to get a kill for that guy, because I know he can take over a game. Now let's go over an example of creating an initial game plan when heading into a game. So in this game, I was actually playing the Syndra versus a Zoe. So let's quickly start by talking about the mid matchup. Yes, hypothetically, Syndra is quite good into Zoe 1v1, but you can't just look at it as champion versus champion. We need to also take into account the runes and the summoner spell choice. Now, what do we see here on my behalf? I've actually opted in for Teleport and Phase Rush, whereas Zoe, on the other hand, has opted in for Heal and Airy. Now, what do we know? We know that Airy is much better at levels 1 and 2. We know that Heal is also a combat spell, so they actually have a combat spell advantage over me. And Heal is also extremely useful in 2v2s, especially when I don't take Ignite. So, already off the board, this is probably going to sway the amount of pressure I'm going to get in this matchup and actually limit our 2v2 strength if a 2v2 is able to break out in the early game. Next, I like to think about the jungle matchup. So this is, again, all in loading screen, or as I'm kind of jumping into a game exactly like this. We see that I've got a Zac, whereas they have a Graves. So roughly, I like to think about their pathing. What do we know about Zac? Well, Zac likes to do predominantly a full clear, isn't really strong levels 1 to 4, whereas Graves, on the other hand, also wants to do a full clear, but is much stronger in those early river skirmishes, and in terms of pathing is much faster, clears much faster than Zac. So it's going to be very hard for us to contest those early scuttles, and in terms of raw strength, Zac just does no damage early game, whereas Graves is going to have red buff, be reliably able to proc that red buff, and utilize that phase rush a lot easier than Zac and that aftershock. Next, I like to think about top lane. So again, those 4 variables: pace, pressure, setup, snowball. The first one, pace, is how heavy trading do I think that matchup's going to be? In the early game, I don't think that's going to be an incredibly heavy trading matchup. Malphite has Grasp. Camille's got Resolve secondary. I don't think this is going to be a very heavy trading matchup. In terms of pressure, again, I think it's very 50-50 in the early game. I don't think one side gets pressure over the other or much pressure over the other. In terms of gank setup, though, at level 6, Camille has extremely good gank setup, so this isn't really going to come into the early game plan per se, but the gank setup is quite good at level 6, so that is already something that I'm thinking about in this game, and especially since Malphite doesn't really have any major gap closers apart from the ultimate. Like, if he can't even escape the ultimate if Camille gets the ult off first, so there's no real way this Malphite can actually escape from a gank at level 6. And then in terms of snowballing, I actually think Camille is a very snowball heavy champion. If I'm able to get 1 or 2 kills onto this Camille, she can take over a game. Next, I'm thinking about bot. So again, the same 4 variables: pace, pressure, setup, snowball. How heavy trading early game do I think it's going to be? Yeah, 2 healing champions, Sonar scaling, Senna scaling. I don't think this is going to be an incredibly fast-paced matchup. It's not like it's Nautilus versus Nami or something like that. In terms of pressure, I think it's pretty 50-50. In terms of gank setup, I think at 6, there's quite a nice amount of gank setup with Sona ult. In terms of snowbally, bot lane is always quite snowbally, but I don't think this is a completely snowbally lane. Like, I think Senna and Ezreal can actually minimize quite well. Whereas, maybe this was like Kai'Sa Alistar who gets a kill, then it's a completely different story. So actually just going back here a little bit before we move on, let's actually tie all this information together to actually create an initial game plan. So with all this information, what I'm thinking is, you know what? I think I'm just going to have to minimize in the early game. Probably keep the wave in the middle. I don't think we're going to be able to contest 2v2 on Scuttles. So if I see Zac move into River, probably ping him back and just make a trade of Scuttles. I don't think any of my sides can really get dived. I don't really think I can make an early roam play. I don't think we can set up a gank onto this Zoe. I think this is going to be a very stale early game. A lot of minimizing, warding for my Zac so he can't really get invaded, and just kind of getting Zac to his level spikes, his level 4, level 5, level 6, and minimizing this early game while playing maybe for an early Darksteel base, maybe playing for a tempo base, maybe finding a way to utilize my TP advantage over this Zoe. Nothing really too special in terms of the initial game plan. So this is a pretty stock standard early initial game plan, nothing too exciting going on. And this is how I would come to this conclusion. So as the game actually pans out, guys, we need to be constantly scanning for new pieces of information. And if we don't scan for new pieces of information, we're not going to know what the best next step is actually going to be, and we won't know what the possible win conditions actually are. So the pieces of information that I actually consider are, number 1, the quality of the trades being taken in the side lanes. Now, what I mean by this is, yes, you can look at the draft and be like, oh, my bot lane got a counter matchup, but if they're not taking good trades, it doesn't mean anything. And even if they get countered, if they're taking good trades, that is incredibly important information to consider when identifying win conditions. And the more you can pan your camera to keep this information topped up and very real time, the more accurate your decision making will actually be. So an example of this would be like, okay, I pan my camera bot and notice that they have the enemy AD carry support pinned under tower with like 20% HP. This says to me that, okay, cool, in terms of my next steps, how could I potentially maximize this situation? Maybe I could get the jungler to gank bot. Maybe I could ward for them, isolate that 2v2. Maybe I could call for a dragon with their pressure. Maybe I could look for a dive on that, shove this in, or maybe play for a tempo base and dive bot. I'm already thinking, how can I utilize the quality of their trades being taken in that lane? And conversely, maybe I initially thought that my bot lane was going to be a win condition, but if I see them getting poked under tower and getting absolutely destroyed, then I know then I need to reconsider what my initial thoughts were and update my initial hypothesis. Number two, I like to think about the current state of my jungler comparatively to the enemy jungler. You can't just look at the state of your jungler in isolation. You got to look at the state of your jungler in comparison to the enemy jungler, because that's important. Because if you don't look at it in compared to the other jungler, you won't know if they're able to get river control vision. You won't know if they're going to get invaded. You won't know if they're going to have tempo or room to even set up a gank. These are all things to consider. So if I know my jungler's really far behind, I won't be able to expect ganks from this guy. So maybe my initial strategy was I wanted to, keep the wave on my side and set up for ganks. But if I know my Xin Zhao or something is incredibly far behind and 2 levels behind, I can't set up ganks anymore. So maybe I need to adapt my strategy, play a little bit more aggressively and play to a side lane. Or maybe I need to play more selfishly or maybe more defensively ward for my jungler in order to give him some freedom to free farm. It's always important as a mid laner to constantly assess the information in regarding to what state is your jungler in. 3, the strength of a laner and their level of mobility. So this is actually where summoner spell check actually comes into play, and this really determines how vulnerable they are to ganks and fights. So for example, I might pan my camera top or press tab and see that again, I'm versing a Camille top. If I'm versing a Camille top, I know that they have a lot of mobility and they have flash as well. They are going to be incredibly hard to roam on towards. Whereas if I'm versing a Rise top with no flash, then I know that they are incredibly vulnerable. So if a fight breaks out at top river, or maybe I have some room to roam, they are going to be incredibly immobile, and I know that I could probably get that gank off a lot more reliably. So that is something that I need to think about. But if I know conversely they are very strong, then I probably don't want to touch that side of the map. Then we need to take into account scaling. Now this is very, very important, because this actually gives context to the value of risky plays. So you'll find that in League of Legends, people force way too hard. A lot of the time, they don't feel comfortable doing nothing. Like, even though it sounds weird, there are times where sometimes it's best to do nothing, or just play for farm and play to minimize and play to just get river control or something like that. For example, maybe I have a Kayle top who's actually taking pretty good trades into something like a Garen or a Darius, and I'm playing Rumble mid or something, and I'm thinking, you know what? I could gank top maybe, but again, I don't know where their jungler is. But, in hindsight, if I'm thinking about scaling, why would I risk that play? It's a bit of a risky play. I don't know if I can get counter ganked, and we probably lose 2v2, but I don't really need to do it because my Kayle's farming really well. But conversely, maybe I have a Quinn top and I'm playing Rumble mid and I'm like versing a Jax and I'm like, and they're going even and I'm like, oh, and I'm versing an Azir mid or something and I'm like, this might be risky for going for this roam, but you know what? If I don't risk it, I think we're just going to slowly lose this game anyway. I need to make something happen. So this is these risky plays, and scaling really gives context to the value of these risky plays. Itemization. Incredibly important, guys. So itemization really determines the amount of durability that person has. So if I look pan top and I see that they have a Thorn Mail and I'm playing something like an Aurelia mid, it's going to be very hard for me to influence that laning, that specific lane. And it's really important to constantly assess itemization. Do they have stopwatches? Are they stacking a certain resist? Is the jungler gone full squishy instead of Cinderhulk? Have they gone full warrior? It's really important because this gives context when it comes to skirmishes, how you want to approach the fight. If I know that the Lee Sin has already gotten warrior and Tiamat, I want to stay the hell away from him. But if I know the Lee Sin maybe went Cinderhulk and a cloth armor, maybe I don't need to be as scared in terms of his level of burst. Itemization gives context to skirmishes. It's very important to keep an eye on it. And then next is actually objectives taken and available on the map, specifically dragons. Now, if you have already taken a dragon earlier in the game, then stacking dragons might be a viable win condition, might be a viable strategy, but maybe, no one can really take objectives because, there's no pressure anywhere. That's completely fine. Maybe you've gotten Rift-held and you can break mid and blow open the game. It's pretty self-explanatory here, guys. Objectives are a big win condition in itself. So what we're going to do now is actually use the variables that I mentioned beforehand to begin to identify possible win conditions. This is the same VOD that I was talking about before. We're only 7 minutes and 43 seconds into this specific VOD. And one thing that I want you guys to remember is that in regards to the painting analogy, we're still very early on into the game. And we're very early on into the painting. There's only a few lines drawn, maybe a rough outline. And yes, we're not going to know exactly what the specific painting is. We're not going to know exactly what the win condition is. But we're going to have we're going to get a better idea of what it isn't. We know 100% that's like definitely not like a mountain, or that's definitely not a beach. And in this game, we know definitely, you can already see here, we're definitely not going to be playing around this Zac, who's level 4 compared to this level 6 Graves. So again, it's constantly about assessing incoming information, starting to cross some things out, and maybe highlight a few other elements within this game. So let's quickly start by talking about number one, the quality of trades in top and bot. So what can we see? We can see that over here is that Camille is not taking very good trades. She's actually half HP, and I don't blame her because this Malphite's actually rushed a Bramble Vest. And on the other hand, my bot lane, they're just full HP. I think it's both 50-50. They're both full HP. And at this point, in terms of quality of trades, there's no real obvious laner that's winning. So I can't really pinpoint an obvious win condition straight off trading. And I can't, this isn't really going to determine where I roam or what I do, because this isn't really giving me many options. So that's the first thing I like to think about. The next thing I like to think about is jungle state. So what's happening in the jungle? So if I was originally in this game thinking that I was going to get ganks, I can basically throw that out the window, because my Zac is 1-3 by 7 minutes 40, 28 CS to 59. Graves is level 6 with a full warriors already. I know that I'm basically never going to get help from this Zac. He's basically removed from the game. And at this point, what I'm thinking is, we're probably just going to have to minimize. Maybe I have to put some defensive vision for him so he doesn't get invaded by Zac. And I have to keep in mind that I'm never going to get any ganks. So this is why it's incredibly important to constantly assess what's happening in the jungle. Next, I like to think about the strength of the laners and just overall mobility. My Camille hasn't really reached any key spikes. Yes, she has ultimate and there is that gank setup, but she isn't that strong at the moment. Nor is my bot lane. She hasn't reached key spikes either. And they're both level 5. So yes, the gank setup isn't quite there yet. In terms of mobility as well, Malphite has ult, and outside of ult doesn't have too much mobility, and Ezreal has a lot of mobility, and Sen is quite hard to gank as well. And on the other hand, Zoe has heal, still has both summoners as well. So I don't think there's going to be any ganks, any roams going on. I think this is going to be very much a slower paced game. In terms of scaling and level assessment, I know that my Camille hasn't got to key spikes yet, hasn't got to those key levels yet. My Kai'Sa and my Sona are still level 5, haven't got to their key spikes yet, and they scale quite nicely, and we scale very well within this game. I know that Camille can take over a game at 2 or 3 items. So in terms of scaling, we scale completely fine. So I don't really feel forced to make a crazy risky play. I'm quite okay to scale into mid game with this composition, because Zac as well scales quite nicely as well. The other thing as well, we need to talk about itemization in terms of spikes and durability. So again, like I mentioned before, there's no real key spikes across the board yet. And in terms of durability, this Malphite has actually got a Bramble Vest, which says to me that if I do enter into a skirmish with this Malphite, he will be quite squishy to me. Whereas on the other hand, Zoe has actually rushed a Mercury Treads, which means that she is going to be quite durable, hard to kill. She has Heal, Mercury Treads, Corrupting Pot. It's going to be quite hard for us to actually burst her down. So that is something I'm already considering. And on the other hand, Graves has still got a full Warriors, but Graves overall is quite tanky, even though he doesn't have many items. And in terms of other itemization, like I said before, Zach hasn't even finished Cinderhulk yet. So it is important to get a feel where everyone is at in terms of their itemization. But more importantly, what resistances are they stacking? What sort of boots do they have? Have they reached their key spikes, etc., etc. Next, I like to think about objectives taken. Quite obvious. There's going to be no dragons. Rift Herald's coming up soon. We can't really contest that. So what I'm thinking already is, if a fight breaks out around an objective, I should probably ping it off. Or if they look for a dragon or a Rift Herald, maybe we can trade it for the opposite objective. So if they go for Rift, maybe we can go for Dragon. Or if they go for Dragon, maybe we can go for Rift. I don't see us being able to win a fight at the moment purely because how strong Graves actually is. So already I'm thinking in terms of objectives, we're not going to be playing for any of them right now. So in this game, tying it back to that painting analogy, I can't really tell you how we're going to win this game at the moment. I don't know. Is Camille going to get to key spikes? I don't know. Is Kai'Sa Sona going to continue to do well in lane? I don't know. There's no real obvious win condition. All I can do tell you right now is that Camille's not going to win for ages, considering the itemization and how, Malphite's actually itemized. And more importantly, I know that Zach isn't going to be a massive influence on this game, and our win condition is not going to revolve around Zach at all. And we're not going to be able to make any plays with Zach for a very long time. So that's all I'm thinking about. This is, again, assessment that should be constantly happening over time. And yes, this has taken me years to refine. And if you were watching this video, guys, and want to apply this to your own gameplay, it'd be fascinating for you to go back on a VOD and see which of these variables do you consider and don't consider when considering your next move into a game and how you come up with your own win conditions. It'd be really a really interesting thought exercise. Now, as the same VOD has gone a little bit later, it's 12 minutes, nearly 13 minutes into the game, what do we see? The win condition is a much clearer, or the win conditions that maybe were a little bit hazy have come a lot more clearer. So in regards to that painting, there's been much more detail, much more color, and we know 100% what it isn't. What can we tell here, guys? Camille is 2-1, working towards her key spikes. Kai'Sa's 2-1-2, Sona's 2-1-3. They're both absolutely popping, working towards their key items. They're ahead of their counterparts. But more importantly, what do we see? Me and Zach are still behind, and me specifically, I'm behind 20 CS. Zoe's incredibly farmed. I'm actually very far behind. So I know 100% this is not a mid-jungle game. I'm behind. Zach's behind. We're not going to play this game through mid-jungle. So that's completely fine. I'm not going to be the carrier of every game. And I have to identify I'm not the win condition of this game. So this leads me to one of the most important points of this entire video, guys. If there is one thing you're going to take from this entire video, I don't care if you never watch my videos again. If you can just take this one thing, okay? Very, very, very important. This is one of the concepts that I've been wanting to talk about for so long. And I am hyping it up a lot, but it will literally single-handedly win you a lot of games and allow you to climb. If you can just internalize this one concept, okay? I termed it losing gracefully. You don't have to be, and you won't be, the carry of every game. This is where losing gracefully comes into play. Once you have identified winning sides or the winning side, even if you are behind, your job is to adapt to the situation. Like I mentioned before, I pointed out that I am not winning. My side lanes are winning. I am not the carry of that game. I need to adapt. I need to lose gracefully. So, how do you identify when you need to lose gracefully? This is generally the case when you have a clearly winning side and you know that if the team complements that person, they can completely take over a game. So on these champions like Camille, Kai'Sa Sona, they can take over a game. Generally starts to become obvious around 10 minutes plus into the game. So let's actually take a look at an example. So again, same example, 11 minutes 30 into the game. I know my top lane is winning. I know my bot lane is winning. I know that the game is not going to be played around mid jungle. And yes, I don't really win mid 1v1 at the moment. And even if I could potentially heavy trade, it's not my job. I don't want the jungler to come here. So my job now involves, number one, staying healthy in lane. So why is that important, you may ask? If I know I want my jungler to hover my bot lane or my jungler to hover my top lane, the last thing that would be good for my team would be to be low HP. If I get low HP, then my jungler is going to be thinking, oh man, I need to hover him, or I need a counter gank, or I need to be around mid to help him get a reset. I should be staying full or at least healthy in lane, because I'm actually simultaneously making my jungler's life easier and minimizing the options of the enemy jungler to come to my lane, because maybe the enemy jungler can't go top because their top's losing and he has to go mid. All right, so I need to stay healthy in my lane. Next, it's okay for me to give pressure, so I will give pressure if need be. And remember that tightrope analogy. It's okay to give pressure, but ideally I want to be walking that tightrope. If I can minimize the amount of pressure that they're going to have, I will do that. I will minimize it. I'll walk that tightrope. But this is where you got to be a little bit careful. And if you're unsure if you can win the trade or not, it's better to be safe than sorry if you have other Fed members on the team. And I'll be warding to my strong side. I'll be leaning to my jungler and my vision, and I'll be giving CS if I have to. I will give CS if I have to. I am completely fine losing 2 or 3 CS this wave if I have to, if it's going to keep me healthy, if I'm not going to die to a gank, if I'm going to not be a burden to my team. Next, I will actually even give tower if I have to. If I have to give a tower and my jungler's ganking a side lane and I know I'm going to get dived, I would rather give the tower than give the tower and die. Okay, I will have to get, and sometimes this is just going to be the sad reality of your game. As long as you're not being a burden to your team, that your teammates will be very, very thankful. And lastly here, guys, I'll be pinging well in advance. So if obviously Zoe's going to get pressure, I have to ping well in advance so the Zoe can't influence the side lane as much. And so actually lastly, staying farmed as possible. So you'd be surprised how well you can actually stay farmed in a game if you just give pressure and stay healthy. A lot of the time, people try to contest minions in the middle of the wave, they get low and then they have to take a bad recall and miss CS. If I just catch the wave under tower, yes, I might lose 1 or 2 creeps, but I can still stay quite farmed just by accepting that I'm going to give pressure. But most people, they don't want to give pressure, and then they'll rather die than give pressure. It just doesn't make sense to me. So just moving on, just a few 10 seconds past, as you can see here, I've actually let Zoe push me in. She's got push on the wave. I'm trying to catch this wave onto tower, staying healthy as possible. So if you notice here, I gave up the wave. I'm staying healthy. I'm catching CS onto tower, and I'm keeping my distance and constantly assessing vision. I know that the jungler is not, I don't want the jungler to gank my lane. I don't want Zach to come anywhere near. I know we lose 2v2. I know I need to stay healthy. And I know if I push up too far in the lane, I can easily die. I have no flash. Grave Zoe are incredibly, a lot stronger than me. And I'm not the win condition. And note, guys, there are always ways to lose more effectively. I know it sounds weird, but there are always ways to lose more effectively, just as there are many ways to win more effectively. This will sound really awkward, and you may not agree with this, but trust me, there are going to be games where you get behind, and there are going to be games where your side lanes are winning. That's just the way solo queue works. Put you in their shoes. If you're winning and you just hope that your side lanes stop inting so you can carry the game. This is such a common occurrence, and you'd be surprised how many games you will win if you can learn this skill. It's a skill. Losing gracefully is a skill, and it takes time to learn. It takes time to improve at it, and all pro players know how to do this skill. They know it very, very well. And if you're a competitive player, you are going to get counterpicked, and you will have to know how to minimize and lose gracefully. It's part of the job. So it doesn't matter what elo you're at, this is a skill that applies to all of you. Now we're going to get into mid and late game win conditions. So as the game gets later and later, and in terms of the painting analogy, there's more and more detail, the options of what that painting could be, it's very limited. You know, it's only 1 or 3 of these things. It can only be maybe it's a beach, or it's a lake, or it's a pool. It's like one of them. The options are increasingly limited, but due to the complexity of the game, the actual win cons can be very hard to pinpoint. So maybe the style they did the painting, it's very hard to determine what exactly is it, even though you know roughly what it is. So let me start by breaking down the variables that actually need to be considered before we cover an example. Number 1, the relative strength of each champion, taking into account scaling, flash cooldowns, the level of engage and level of mobility, itemization, tankiness and overall durability, the way the champions want to fight. So what I mean by the way they want to fight, this is very important in regards to champion identity as well, is that there are some champions that want to play really fast. So they want to play the fight extremely fast because they're very burst oriented or very ultimate heavy. But there's also champions that want to play the fights really slow because they have a lot of sustained damage, maybe like a Cassio or a Rise, or something like that. And where on the map they want to fight. So certain champions want to fight in choke points because they have a lot of AoE, whereas certain champs want to play in the open because they want to poke. Like Ezreal wants to play in the open, whereas Rumble wants to play in a choke point. And then also taking into account objectives, depending on what objectives are on the map, maybe Barons up, etc., or Mountain Souls, etc. And then micro interactions of abilities. So what I mean by micro interaction of abilities, that's basically, does this ability counter that ability? So a perfect example would be, Olaf ultimate countering Thresh Hook, or Heimerdinger turret countering Blitzcrank Hook. Like all these small unique interactions or like Fizz E countering ZR. All these small micro interactions that really come into play mid to late game. So what we're going to do now is actually cover a mid to late game. This is actually 29 minutes into a game. So basically late game, 30 minutes into a game, a situation where we're going to identify or go through all these variables and identify what should actually happen. So I'm actually playing Rumble in this game, and I'm actually quite fed. So let's actually start by talking about relative strength. So in terms of relative strength, like the two people I would say in this game that are very strong or much stronger than everyone else, I'd say actually a Warwick. Since he's so fed, he's 9-2. Yes, he's the same level, but in terms of straight items, I would say this Warwick is very, very strong. Specifically because he's actually got Spirit Visage versus Ornn's got a lot of AP, Victor, so basically triple AP in a way. So I would say this Warwick's very, very strong. And even me to a certain extent. I've actually got 3 items over, 2 items of this 2 and 7 Victor. So relative strength, I would say me and this Warwick are quite strong, and even Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger's got 9 kills, 3 full items, and a stopwatch. So I would say these 3 champions are the ones that are relatively stronger than everyone else. Flash cooldown. So I knew in this game that Victor had no flash. I timed Victor's flash, so Victor had no flash, and that's incredibly important because if I know, especially in a mobile champion that doesn't have flash, that will actually dictate our threat range and who we can actually burst and who we can catch out. So it's incredibly important to assess. The level of engage and mobility. So when you verse comps that have no mobility, or no engage, it says to me that you can maybe actually split push, or you can do some form of 4-1 or a 1-3-1 setup. But because they have an Ornn, which is, one of the hardest forms of engage in the game versus very immobile champions, like Warwick's pretty immobile, I'm immobile, MF immobile, or kind of immobile. I mean, he has movement speed, but we haven't really got many champions with gap closes. This says to me that we can't afford to split. We can afford to split in the sense we're in the same area but not grouped together, but we can't really afford to be in the side lane or come in from a different angle because they can just engage on one of us quite easily. So they have a lot of engage. And conversely for us, we don't really have that much engage at all. I mean, we kind of have Warwick ults, but our level engage is quite low. Now, why this is important to understand is that if we had a lot of engage, then because we don't have a lot of engage, it means that one of them could potentially sit in the side, and we can't really look to punish them that well. That is something to think about. Itemization, obviously important to think about. The key ones are stopwatches and just overall resistances. And again, like I highlighted before, Warwick has Spirit Visage into basically triple AP. So this Warwick's going to be incredibly hard to kill. And anything else worth noting here? Not really. I would say that's the key one. In terms of itemization, actually, MF hasn't hit 3 item spike yet, which is very, very big. 80 carry without 3 item spike is very, very big. Next is overall tankiness and durability. I would say that Ornn is probably the only one that's quite tanky. Other than that, everyone else in the team basically gets shredded. Same thing for us, though. We don't really have anyone that's quite tanky apart from Warwick. So it's basically only 2 tanks on the other team. And the only form of durability and self-peel they have is actually the stopwatch here on Heimer. 6, the way we want to fight. So again, our composition, we have Elise, Warwick, MF. We're very ultimate focused and very burst heavy. We just want to go in, get the fight done, and get out. We can't go in and out. We can't have an extended skirmish. Otherwise, we're going to lose. Whereas on the other hand, they have a Heimerdinger, good in extended fights. Victor, good in extended fights. These champions and Thresh as well can go in and out of the fight with Lantern and hooks and things like that. We are just very burst heavy and want to go, very ultimate focused. Whereas they can actually play the fights much slower. And they're not really ultimate reliant. Because Victor, yes, his ultimate's quite heavy and quite good. But Victor can still do a lot of damage just with E's and Q's. And Heimerdinger just turrets. So they want extended fights. I would say we want more burst fights. Where on the map we want to fight. So our composition, as you know, because we want choke points because we have MF and Rumble, we want to fight in those choke points around objectives. So we want to either fight around a Baron or a Dragon, or around one of those choke points in the jungle, or even in the river. We don't want to fight in the middle of the lane because essentially me and MF are going to be useless. So that's also something I'm really thinking about, and that's something that will largely dictate my call within this game. So I'm a mid laner in this game. I'm the Rumble. I never want to fight in the open. I want to wait for them to get to an area where I know it suits me. And then objectives and micro interactions. Objectives, everyone really wants this third dragon, which is the third Ocean Soul for us. And Baron's actually coming up in 30 seconds. And lastly, micro interactions worth noting. Olaf his ult can actually disable, obviously, Blitzcrank Hook, Cocoon, and even Warwick Ultimate. And even Ornn W can interrupt Elise Cocoon, Warwick Ultimate, Blitzcrank Hook, I believe. Heimerdinger turret can block Blitzcrank Hook as well. I would say they're the only real micro interactions that are probably worth noting. So the next frame here, as we go on a little bit, we're starting to group mid. So notice here, as we can draw on the minimap, MF and Blitz are kind of we're split up a little bit. But we know that they really want to walk into this dragon. So I'm actually just pathing up a little bit here, knowing that I don't want to fight here. So I'm like just pinging back a little bit. I know that this is bad. I'm really not using my ultimate. I'm waiting patiently, knowing that this is not the area we want to fight. And this actually suits them much better. So I know we need to disengage here and just chill a little bit, because Ornn can easily engage on us, and but if he engages on us here, I know that he's too far from his team. But more importantly, I know this is not the place where we want to fight. So I wanted to play patient. And then the next frame, I know they were going to walk into river. So they end up walking into river. Warwick ends up getting an ultimate onto this Ornn and locking him down. And then Elise flashes from over here, stunning the Victor. And so look at this. Small corridor here. MF ult, Rumble ult coming down like this on all of them. Stun target here. Perfect fight for us, where we're able to get onto the backline, onto the squishy targets who are not durable at all and have no MR. We're able to CC the targets who have no flashes. Like we timed the Victor flash, so we know this Victor couldn't avoid this flash stun from Elise. And we also knew that we wanted these choke points where we could get our AoE ultimates off. So pretty stock standard stuff. And so whether you're in solo queue, whether you're doing clash, whether you're doing flex, or any of these ones, what I highly recommend you doing is going over the VOD together and covering these specific variables. Thinking about what didn't you consider. Maybe you didn't consider the objective coming up. Maybe you didn't consider itemization. Maybe you didn't consider the level of engage, or the flash cooldowns, or where you wanted to fight, or how you wanted to fight. I knew that in this fight, we had to go fast. We had to go in, we had to go hard, we can't hesitate, and we can only play the fight fast. So have a think about it when you're doing your own reviews, and this can really help you improve identifying how you want to play out the game and these win conditions heading into late game. I want to tie this video all together quite nicely by ending it on how to execute on this video. So number one, guys, in your games, come up with a theory of your initial game plan, your win conditions throughout the game, and how you thought the game should be played out. And secondly, in review, use the variables that I actually talk about within this video to review your decision making and whether or not your hypotheses were correct or incorrect. For example, did you consider how the side lanes were trading and the quality of the trades? Did you consider the pace of those trades? Did you consider itemization? Did you consider where on the map your champion wants to fight, etc., etc.? It will take a long time to actually cover all these variables, and you'll realize, holy moly, I'm actually not considering how they were trading at all, or I didn't consider flash timers, or I didn't consider their summoner choice and rune choice. I didn't consider the key spikes or what level they want to fight, etc., etc. You'll realize there are key variables that you're just straight up not considering, and maybe you're putting too much of a dependence on other variables over others, and it can be really, really eye-opening. And actually begin to discuss this with either your duo partner or a friend, going over a VOD together. This can be really good for actually getting second opinions on things and really broadening your view of the game. And it can really help you just get a better understanding of how team fights or how win conditions or how your decision making can actually just improve within a game. And keep in mind, guys, that it may have been the right decision, but you just executed it poorly. Maybe in that last team fight before, I mess up my Rumble ult. It doesn't mean that the decision in the moment was incorrect. Maybe I actually ticked all the boxes. Maybe it was just a micro mistake. So you got to keep in mind that maybe you've just done all the right things, but you just messed up that last step, which is completely fine. That's something you can easily fix over time. And note, guys, see how this stuff can only come after you have all the fundamentals down pat. If you don't know wave manipulation, you don't know jungle tracking, or don't have information, you don't understand how jungle works, or you don't understand tempo, you don't understand all of these concepts, there's no way you're going to be able to, get better at identifying win conditions. You're not going to be able to improve your adaptation within a game. You need to have these fundamentals down pat first. And keep in mind, guys, if you don't have champion mastery either, how the hell are you going to know what to do? This is, again, reiterating why knowing how to play 3 or 4 champions really well and being clear on that champion's identity will help you make better quality decisions and actually be able to identify win conditions much clearer. So you're not going to get yourself into sticky situations. So unless you have at least 20 games played, like 30 games played on a champion, there's no way you're going to get close to answering half of these questions and being able to go through these variables. So thanks for watching, everyone. I know this was a very in-depth video. It may not be for all of you, but I really wanted to get this video done because I think it is important and it can help a lot of you guys who really want to up your game from like here to that next level. So I appreciate any feedback. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.